going to do our very best to follow sort of our normal format, which means that I will start by, I trust you've all received the handout, but I will speak as if you don't have a copy in front of you, just in case it's hard to see both of those things at the same time. But what we have anticipated for our format today is that we will go through the opening remarks, and that part of the session will be recorded. During that part of the session, you are welcome to use the chat and send me a question, and I'll answer it as I speak. But you'll also have an opportunity at the end where we will stop recording, and you can ask any kind of question you'd like, and we can turn the video back on when we finish that part. So feel free to interact using the chat function right now, or to ask questions afterwards, or to do both. And I'll go ahead and get started. So for those of you who have the handout in front of you, you have two pages. One is the list of the folders in eDossier, and we'll connect that in just a moment. But the first page I'd like for you to look at, there's a table called Before We Start, and you probably didn't have much of a chance to take a look, but essentially what that activity asks you to do, and I think it's a good way to synthesize the information afterwards as well, is to think about what measures impact in your field, in your discipline, in your sub-discipline, and make a list of accomplishments that match those various indicators of accomplishment. You might think about ranking them in the order of importance, and then you might also think about whether or not these are universally understood. So some things, if you say in my field, a book is an indicator of impact, most people in book-driven fields understand that to be the case. However, if it's something that's a little bit different or that's specific to your field, that's also an indication that you might also need to think about how to translate that, how to articulate that outside your field. And then the next step is to look and see whether or not these are actually named directly in the criteria that'll be applied to your promotion case, or whether your job in your narrative is to show how you meet the criteria through these activities. And this is the overarching goal for the conversation today, is that we're going to go through each of these aspects. For those of you who are just joining, I have let everyone know that you are welcome to send questions through the chat function right now. And you're also welcome to save your questions for the end. We will be recording the beginning portion, and then we will stop the recording again at the end. So you have a chance to ask questions either while I'm speaking, or at the end you can ask any kind of question that you like, and we will not make that second part of the conversation public. If you're looking then at the handout, and for those of you who have done several of the Institute for Advanced Study VPFA workshops, you know, we start with the criteria almost every time. And so step one, not surprisingly, is to look and understand your own promotion policies and the criteria against which you will be judged. And what I've done is paste links and sources for finding the criteria for campus and for your school, and also for your department. You can find all of those from our website. Oh, great. Thank you, Charlotte. There's a link to the document if you'd like to see it in the chat function now. And I've taken examples here. The bolding is mine, and it's just to give you a sense of the kind of wording that you're going to find. So these are criteria for excellence in research. If you're looking at a balanced case, you'll want to look specifically at the criteria for very good. If you're in the libraries, you'll also want to look for the definition of satisfactory within the library criteria, because of course you'll want excellence in performance if you're not presenting a balance case. So when we're talking about research, we're talking about research and or creative activity. And in the case of the libraries, professional development, research, and creative activity. So you can take what we're saying about excellence in research and then extrapolate to your own particular field and the case that you hope to present. So if you're looking then at the criteria, this is from the College of Arts and Sciences, you'll see that there are words that indicate leadership, and we can talk in a moment, and also substantial field, which I think we can unpack a little bit. And you'll notice that it says national and or international leadership. And I think that's something we should talk about in just a minute. That's going to take different forms for different fields. And oh, the file Charlotte didn't open. And then I've taken the criteria from astronomy. And I did that because I think they do a nice job of laying out what it is they're looking at without really tying people in. So you'll see that I've bolded words like original research. They mention the quality, and of course that's determined by journals. And they also mention the ways that you might show that impact in order of importance. And they mention publications and citations. So in that field, it's very clear both what they're looking at and what those pieces of evidence are supposed to show. In some fields, you'll find your criteria isn't quite so clear, and you'll have to put those, you'll have to connect those dots as part of preparing your dossier. And at the end of their description, you'll see they say that they're looking for you to have a comparable level to faculty at peer institutions. So this is where the external letters come in again. And bear in mind when your materials go out to external readers, the packet that you send includes the criteria, and it can include a statement where you tell how you've met those criteria. So part of what we're trying to do today, on the one hand, is think about ways that you can demonstrate impact, and looking back, reflecting as you get closer to going up for promotion, thinking about the kinds of connections you need to articulate so that you show that your accomplishments do in fact respond to those criteria. So depending on the stage you find yourself, it may be a forward-looking or a reflective exercise. So moving then to step 2. So what we've done so far is we've said, well, the most important thing is always the criteria. Start with the criteria. And if you look at the criteria, you'll find wording that has to do with discipline-specific department, school, and then campus criteria for demonstrating the impact of your work. And in essence, what we're looking to find is, well, who's paying attention, who's benefiting from the good work that you do. And again, if you're presenting a balance case, you may be looking to meet the criteria for very good rather than excellent. If you're in the libraries or you're going up for excellence in service or teaching in other schools, then you're looking to meet the criteria for satisfactory. But in every case, you're engaging with that wording. And generally speaking, what you'll find is mentions of your reputation and your impact. And so the kinds of questions that you want to be thinking about are how do people learn about good work in your field? How do people learn about research? How is this information shared? And what are the best ways to share information? That's just another way of saying, what are the venues that are read by the most people, that are the most selective, that are recognized as the cornerstone of scholarship in a particular area? There may not be an agreement. So this is the next question in line. It asks you whether or not there's an understanding. In some fields, everyone agrees what a tier 1 journal is, and in others, it's not exactly the case. And so you may also have some work to do in explaining why it is that the venues you've selected are important for your field, or important for multiple fields if you're doing cross-disciplinary work, or important for different readerships within the same field. And there are also other markers, indicators of quality, and those are field specific, but they often take the form of citation indices or impact factors of the journals. There are indices of different kinds. There's H index, J index, and these depend on the field. If you don't know about those, that just probably means in your field that's not the way of communicating impact. And then there are other activities also that can indicate the strength of your reputation. So it is service to perform reviews for other journals or to serve on an editorial board. However, you get invited to do those things based on your research expertise. And so those are other ways to show that people are noticing your work, They're associating you with a particular research program, and it's had an impact on the field. If you're not certain what the best venues are, what the best way to show impact in your field is, there are a couple ways you can double check your work. So you start with an assumption when you read the criteria that in my field, these are the activities that matter, and here are the ways that I will show my impact on the field. And then you can double check by first looking for mentors. For those of you who weren't able to attend, I believe it's our second workshop on mentoring, we do have handouts with information about mentoring. But the idea is that there are multiple people who can provide information and guidance for multiple reasons. So there may be people in your department, on campus, and in your field, all of whom have good points to make, good advice to give. So the idea there is not to find a single person, but to find multiple sources of information and see that your senior colleagues, both in your field and in your department, agree with you that those are the ways to show impact. And the other thing that you can do, which doesn't require any kind of interaction at all, is to do a little bit of internet research. Take a look at CVs of people that you admire, people who are leaders in your field, people who've done something innovative and been recognized for it, and take a look at where their work appears. What form does that work take? What kinds of activities are they engaged in? And those are other good ways, if you compare yourself to models, of engaging actually with the criteria. Are you meeting the expectations of your field relative to your peers? And sometimes that can take a lot of pressure off because you realize there isn't one particular model of what it looks like to be a full professor. In fact, there may be multiple ways to get there. And so you can gain an understanding of the breadth of activity in your field and how various people, again, that you recognize because of their accomplishments, are meeting those goals. And then step 3 is where you connect the dots. This is where you have a good understanding of your field and you have a good understanding of the criteria, and you connect that in the form of your own personal narrative. And you may find that there are ways that you've had an impact or your work has been recognized that actually are pretty unique to your own case. And that's a great thing. There are normal metrics, there are indices, there are citations, and those are the kinds of things that you want to show across fields. But there might also be other ways to show that you're having an impact through your scholarship, through your research, creative activity, or professional development. For example, it may matter who's citing your research. And so rather than a purely numerical approach to this is how many people noticed, it might also really matter to show how widespread or how focused or at Big Ten universities, how often your work is recognized. Those are other ways to think about your community of impact in creative ways. It's also the case that your students carry on your legacy. And so oftentimes talking about students that you've trained is a part of showing the impact of your scholarship. They may have the opportunity to do independent research with you, to co-author with you. They may have gone on to fantastic careers in your field or in other fields. All of that speaks to your influence through your scholarship on the community around you. And finally, I've already mentioned activities in editorial work, professional organizations. Those also recognize your stature in the field. And then the last step, and this is where that other handout comes in, is to build a dossier that shows this. So again, you're taking the criteria and you're taking the models in your field and you're connecting your own work in that context. And so what you do is fill the folders of the dossier with evidence that that's the case. Now, one thing about the e-dossier folders, what you have on that handout and that list can also be found on the VPFA website. It's a list of folders, and we've given you some hints at the kinds of things that might go in there. None of those lists are exhaustive. There may be other things that you see that we haven't included, or there may be things on that list that you don't do, and this is perfectly fine. That list is actually not particular to eDossier. It comes from the promotion and tenure criteria document where you'll find the guidelines. And the very last page is a checklist, and it's the traditionally, for those of you who had paper files for tenure, for example, you go through and you check and you make sure everything's present. It's the same list. It's just been recreated in electronic format. So if you look at that checklist, what your challenge is to show your own individual case in that structure. It is not the case that any of those folders is mandatory, and it is not the case that there is a right piece of information. I mean, if it says CV, your CV goes in the CV folder. But in most cases, you have the flexibility to showcase your own work in a way that makes sense for your discipline and for your department. And when you look at those folders, you might start to think about other kinds of ways that you can show your impact. And so it should also serve to stimulate sort of a brainstorming activity in thinking about, as I move forward, what kinds of information would I like to collect. And it's also important to tell the reader what they're seeing. So the idea of folders is not to just dump several things in each folder, but also to have maybe an abbreviated table of contents that says, in this folder, I will show my impact in the following ways, and explain which materials are in there, help them make sense for a reader who's outside your discipline. And this falls with the next suggestion, which is providing summaries and cover pages. So you do want to make sense of the information. I think that's easier to do if you've already thought clearly about the criteria and what it is you need to show to demonstrate your impact. And for those of you who are looking forward toward promotion with several years to plan, it's a great way to identify the kinds of things that you'll want to save along the way. It's certainly much easier to be saving them as you move along than it is to go back and find documentation for each of those accomplishments. And I think I've added a final word, and I think it connects nicely with what I said we would take up again, which is the national or international reputation. That has always been a bit of a concern. People say, but I don't travel, or most of my work is happening in the States. I don't believe that was ever the intention of that language. It's not intended to say you must travel the world, you must be invited to give talks outside the country. What it means is, beyond your geographic limitations, who else is noticing your work? So your international reputation also stems from the readership of the journals where you publish your work, or the press where you publish your work. If you're on an editorial board for a journal and people on that board come from all over the world, that is having an international reputation. So don't be limited to the interpretation that you physically need to be moving throughout the world in order to develop that reputation. In fact, it's more about who's noticing your work, who's benefiting from your work. And if you think about it that way, your work is what has to travel and not necessarily you physically. And I say that this is an especially timely conversation precisely because we're in a situation where many of you are unable to travel. You might have traveled to a home country and be stuck there. You might be stuck here because you can't return to your home country, your research country, your field of interest. You may have had conference travel that was canceled. I actually got pretty lucky this semester. I had all but one of my trips take place before all of the bans went into place, but other people weren't so lucky, and it does limit your movement. So particularly as we face uncertain territory, it is a time where I believe we can think creatively about international reputation. It may not be even possible at this point to do a lot of international travel. And so we need to think about other ways to connect and to make sure our research is getting out into the world. But I think that was always the case. I think maybe now we're just being, it's been driven to the forefront. And it's still something I think that with technology, you know, this workshop being an example of it, we're able to do and do well. And so again, when thinking about impact, what you want is for your research to be leaving your own narrow confines, even if presently none of us are able to leave the place where we are presently sitting. So I will end with that. And what we'll do right now is conclude the recorded session. It may still record because